Izzy grew up in a beautiful mansion, but behind those elegant walls hid a painful truth. Her mother passed away too soon. Her father buried himself in work, and her stepmother cold, cruel, and always looking for ways to break her spirit. Izzy learned to live with silence and tears, until the day she found her mother's old journal. Inside were chilling words: "Don't let her in, or we'll lose everything." From that moment, nothing was the same. Will Izzy find the courage to tell her father the truth? Or should she stay silent to keep the peace? What would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is just the beginning of Izzy's story. What happens next inside that mansion will break your heart and inspire you. So stay with me and let's dive in. The sun was beginning its descent behind the vineyard, casting a golden light across the Sutherland estate. The vast rolling hills of Napa Valley stretched out in all directions, the deep green vines mingling with the deepening orange hues of a California autumn. The air, thick with the scent of ripened grapes, seemed to pulse with life as the harvest season neared its end. But inside the mansion, all was still. Izzy Sutherland stood by the tall windows of the grand living room, her small fingers tracing the dust on the polished windowsill. The mansion, with its sprawling white walls and intricate wooden details, was a symbol of wealth, of achievement, of everything her father had worked for over the years. But as she watched the shadows lengthen outside, she felt no comfort in the grandeur of it all. No warmth. It was as though the house itself had been frozen in time, preserving only the echoes of laughter that once filled the halls, the laughter of her mother Laura, who had once danced in the kitchen with her, who had once been the heartbeat of this home. A long, steady sigh escaped Izzy's lips, a sound lost in the stillness of the room. Her gaze shifted to the open doorway, where the soft clink of heels echoed from the hallway. Elena, the woman who had entered their lives like a gust of wind, swift, cold, and uninvited. She appeared in the doorway. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile too tight to be genuine, as if she had rehearsed the expression over and over. She was stunning, no doubt, tall poised, her elegance rivaling the very vineyards outside. But there was something hollow in her gaze, something calculating beneath the surface. "Izzy, sweetheart." Elena's voice was smooth, sweet, too sweet. It was a voice that could charm anyone if they didn't look closely enough. "You must be tired after your walk in the vineyard. Dinner's ready." Izzy didn't reply. She didn't need to. The chill between them was palpable. She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch Elena's eyes, and then she turned back to the view outside. Elena stepped into the room, her heels clicking louder, now echoing in the emptiness. The air in the room thickened, and for a moment it felt as though time had stopped. It was just the two of them standing in the same room, worlds apart. "Your father is in the study," Elena continued, stepping closer, her eyes sweeping over Izzy's hunched shoulders, her drawn posture. "He's waiting for you." Izzy felt the pressure of those words settle in her chest like a stone. She had never felt more like a stranger in her own home than she did at that moment. The mansion with its towering walls felt more like a fortress now, one that had been built to keep her out. It wasn't just the walls of the house that separated her from her father. It was the invisible barrier that had grown between them ever since Elena had stepped into their lives, a shadow that clung to the corners of the house, slipping between the spaces where love used to be. For the first time in weeks, Izzy felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough, hadn't she? Her mother's absence had carved a hole in her heart, and she had spent years trying to fill it with memories of better days. But now that hole felt deeper, darker. Elena's presence in the house, her cold, flawless beauty had only served to widen it, leaving Izzy feeling more alone than ever before. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly as she watched Izzy turn away from her, sensing the defiance in her silence. "You know," Elena said, her tone a little colder now, "your father would be very disappointed if you didn't join him for dinner." She stepped closer, her breath light on the back of Izzy's neck. "He's been so busy lately. It's hard for him to juggle everything, you know. But I'm sure he'd love to see you, sweetheart. Just like old times." Izzy didn't turn to face her. Instead, she kept her eyes trained on the fading light outside the colors of the vineyard, blending with the horizon like a painting left unfinished. She could hear Elena's heels tapping softly on the hardwood floor, fading as she walked away. The door clicked shut with a finality that left a coldness lingering in the air. The house was silent again, but it was the kind of silence that filled you with an unbearable weight, one that settled on your chest and made it hard to breathe. Izzy closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle in. She wished her mother were here. She wished that Laura's laughter could fill the house again, that she could run to her mother's arms and feel safe again. But those days were gone, now lost to the past. All that remained was this hollow mansion and the father who had slowly withdrawn into his work, seeking refuge in the one thing that could never offer him solace. Elliot Sutherland had always been a man of great ambition, a self-made millionaire who had built a thriving vineyard from the ground up. He had poured his heart and soul into the land, into the vines that had given him success, but it had cost him more than he was willing to admit. His marriage to Laura had been built on love, on shared dreams, but after her death, he had closed himself off, burying his grief beneath the pressure of maintaining the vineyard's legacy. The vineyard had become his everything, but in doing so, he had lost the one thing that truly mattered: his daughter. Izzy's footsteps were soft on the hallway carpet as she made her way towards the dining room. The house, though grand, felt empty now. It wasn't just the lack of her mother's presence that made it feel this way. It was the absence of her father's love. The once warm, inviting home had turned into a cold shell, a place where no one spoke the truth, where smiles were exchanged, but never felt. When Izzy entered the dining room, her father was already seated at the head of the long oak table, his gaze fixed on the phone in his hand. The light from the chandelier above cast a warm glow on his face, but there was no warmth in his eyes, no connection. He looked up briefly, offering a smile that was more of a reflex than anything genuine. "Hey, kiddo." He said, his voice tired but not unkind. "Glad you could make it?" Izzy smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She sat down across from him, the space between them feeling miles wide. The clink of silverware echoed in the silence as the meal was served, but there was no conversation. No connection. Just the rhythmic clatter of plates being set down, the gentle scrape of cutlery against porcelain. Elena's presence hung over the table, though she wasn't there. Her absence was felt in the way Elliot avoided looking at Izzy for too long, how he kept his focus on his phone, how the conversation seemed to fall flat before it could even begin. There were no questions about school, no offers of advice, no warm smiles or playful teasing, just an awkward, strained quiet that seemed to settle over everything. Izzy pushed her food around her plate, her mind wandering to the vineyard outside. She remembered the days when she and her mother would wander the rows of vines, laughing, talking about everything and nothing. But those days felt like a distant dream, now fading and slipping further out of reach. Elliot set his phone down with a sigh, rubbing his eyes. "Izzy," he said softly, his voice almost apologetic. "I know I haven't been around much, but I've been doing my best. For both of us." Izzy didn't respond. She didn't know how to. She had been waiting for her father to see her, to really see her, but every day that passed seemed to take him further away. The space between them, once filled with laughter and love, had now become a chasm that no words could bridge. And as the evening stretched on, the mansion stood like a monument to their broken family, a place once full of life, now echoing with the quiet sobs of a daughter whose voice had been drowned by the weight of silence. The days that followed felt like an extension of that suffocating silence, a thick blanket that smothered the house and its inhabitants. Izzy could feel it pressing in on her from all sides, the weight of her father's absence, the coldness of Elena's presence. Every corner of the mansion, every creak of the old floorboards seemed to echo the same thing: nothing was as it should be. Nothing felt like home anymore. In the mornings when the light filtered softly through the vines outside, Izzy would walk down the long hallway to the kitchen, where Lydia the housekeeper was always there with a warm smile and a kind word. But even Lydia couldn't fill the empty space inside Izzy's chest. She'd try to engage with her, asking about her drawings, or offering her a cup of warm tea. But Izzy's answers were always short, her mind always elsewhere, drifting over the memory of her mother's touch, the laughter they used to share. By now it had become routine. The mornings were the same. Lydia's quiet chatter, Izzy's distracted responses, and the evenings were an extension of that same quiet. Elena's presence in the house only seemed to amplify the silence, making every room feel like a stranger's house, every conversation hollow. The only time Izzy truly felt alive, truly felt like herself, was when she was out in the vineyard. There, surrounded by rows upon rows of vines, she could breathe. The scent of the earth, the sweetness of the ripening grapes, the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, these things anchored her in ways that the mansion never could. It was the one place where she didn't feel invisible. She could walk among the vines, let her fingers brush the leaves, and find solace in the rhythm of the world around her. But even that peaceful refuge was starting to feel distant. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a deep orange light over the land, Izzy wandered further than usual. She walked until the sound of the house faded into the background, until the distant hum of the cars on the highway was nothing but a faint murmur. The vineyard stretched out before her, an endless sea of green, the rows of grapevines forming neat, unbroken lines. But as she wandered deeper into the heart of the vineyard, something caught her eye. There, hidden behind a grove of old oak trees, was a small wooden door, nearly invisible if you didn't know where to look. Izzy had never seen it before. Curiosity tugged at her, and for a moment she hesitated. It was a part of the estate she didn't recognize, and something about it felt wrong. But then she thought of her mother, the stories she had told her about the old cellar where she used to go when she needed to think to breathe. With a trembling hand, Izzy pushed open the door, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the space dimly lit by the fading light that crept through small cracks in the stone walls. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes adjusted to the dark. There in the corner was a stack of old crates, the kind that had been used for the harvest years ago. But it wasn't the crates that drew her attention. It was the scent, the faint, familiar smell of her mother's perfume, the one that she wore on special occasions when she would take Izzy to the town square for ice cream. It was a scent that Izzy had nearly forgotten, but now it flooded her senses, bringing a rush of memories. Her heart began to race as she stepped deeper into the room. The floor was covered in layers of dust, but there were signs that someone had been here. Recently, footprints in the dust, a chair that had been moved. Izzy's pulse quickened, her mind racing with questions. Who had been here? Why had her mother ever come to this hidden corner of the estate? In the farthest corner of the room, behind a stack of crates, she saw something glinting in the low light. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn with age. Izzy's hands trembled as she reached for it, her fingers brushing the surface of the journal before pulling it into her lap. It was heavy, the pages thick and yellowed with age. As she opened it, she could see the faded ink of her mother's handwriting, elegant and precise. The first page was a letter written in her mother's familiar script. As Izzy read it, her stomach churned. It was a letter to her father, Elliot. Her mother had written it long before her death, and it was filled with warnings, with fears, with truths that had never been spoken. It was about Elena, the woman who had slowly, insidiously taken over their lives. Elliot, I'm scared. I've been trying to ignore it, to pretend that everything is fine, but there are things about her I can't ignore anymore. I've seen the way she watches you, the way she talks to you when you're not paying attention. I'm not sure what she wants, but I don't trust her. You need to be careful. I fear that if she gets too close, she'll take everything from us, our family, our happiness, our future. Please be careful. Don't let her in. Izzy's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had known. She had known something about Elena that Izzy hadn't yet understood, something dark and dangerous. And now the same woman was living in their house, playing the part of the perfect stepmother, while Izzy was slowly suffocating under her control. Izzy's hands shook as she closed the journal, her heart pounding. She had to know more. She had to find the truth. The words on the page were a warning, but they didn't tell her enough. She needed answers, and she couldn't wait for her father to give them to her. He had been too blind, too absorbed in his work to notice what was happening right under his nose. It was up to her to uncover the truth. That night, as the darkness settled over the mansion, Izzy sat in her room, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She couldn't sleep, not with the weight of what she had discovered. Her mind raced with questions. What had Elena done to her mother? What was she still doing to her father? And what role had her mother's warnings played in the last few months of her life? As the clock ticked on, Izzy made a decision. She would confront Elena. She would force her to tell her what was really going on. The woman had been playing a game, hiding behind a mask of sweetness and charm, but Izzy saw through it now. She was no longer the silent, withdrawn little girl who could be easily ignored. She was a daughter who had been betrayed, and she wasn't going to let her father's blindness or Elena's manipulation destroy everything her mother had tried to protect. The next morning she slipped out of the house early, her footsteps light on the cold stone floors. The mansion was still sleeping, the air thick with the quiet of dawn. As she made her way toward the kitchen, she saw Elena standing by the window, her back to Izzy, her phone pressed to her ear. She was talking in hushed tones, her voice low and deliberate. Izzy froze. She wasn't sure if Elena had heard her, but she didn't want to take any chances. She backed away, retreating into the shadows of the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the journal in her hand, a silent witness to everything she had uncovered. She was no longer a passive observer in her own life. She was the one holding the power now, and she would use it to uncover the truth. With the morning light spilling through the windows, Izzy knew that things were about to change. Her father would never understand it, not at first. But she had made up her mind. The secret was out now, and it was up to her to find the rest of it. No more silence, no more waiting. She would uncover Elena's past, and in doing so, she would take back her own future. Izzy had spent the next few days with her mind in overdrive, piecing together fragments of truth she'd discovered in the journal and the subtle, unsettling behaviors she'd witnessed in the house. Her mother's warnings about Elena kept echoing in her thoughts, and the more she thought about them, the more she realized how blind she had been to what was really happening around her. The family she once thought she could rely on had been fractured long before her mother's death, and now the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this inside her father, so wrapped up in the vineyard, so unaware of Elena's manipulation, was the last person she could turn to. There was no way he would believe her now. Not after everything that had happened. He had already made his choice, and his choice was Elena. Izzy's decision was final. She would confront Elena directly. It was the only way to uncover the truth, to stop this masquerade once and for all. But she had to be careful. She couldn't let Elena see how much she knew, not yet. Elena was cunning. She was always one step ahead, playing the victim when it suited her, manipulating her father with a smile that concealed everything beneath the surface. It was late afternoon when Izzy made her way through the winding corridors of the mansion, the air thick with tension. She had never felt so focused, so determined. Her heart was beating loudly in her chest as she approached the study where she knew Elena would be. Her father had gone into town for a meeting, leaving the house eerily quiet. This was her chance, her only chance. As she reached the study door, Izzy took a deep breath. She had rehearsed what she was going to say in her head 100 times, but now standing on the threshold, her nerves were taut. Her fingers clenched around the journal in her hands. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. The door opened quietly, revealing Elena sitting behind the large desk, her back to Izzy. She was looking out the window, her posture as perfect as always, her face expressionless, but with a slight smile playing on her lips. Elena didn't even flinch when Izzy entered the room, as if she had been expecting her. The power dynamics were all wrong, the way Elena seemed in control of everything in this house, of everything Izzy held dear. Izzy stood in the doorway, holding the journal tightly against her chest. "We need to talk." Elena didn't turn around immediately, and Izzy's heart raced. She could feel the weight of every second ticking by, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice smooth, almost too sweet. "Of course, darling. Come in. What's this about?" Izzy took a step forward, her breath shallow. She couldn't back down now. "You know exactly what this is about." Elena turned slowly in her chair, her eyes flashing with a mixture of curiosity and something darker, something Izzy had come to recognize in the last few weeks, a hint of something dangerous behind the carefully constructed facade. The smile on Elena's face didn't reach her eyes, but it was still there, practiced and perfect. "I'm not sure I do," she said coolly. "Why don't you enlighten me?" Izzy's grip tightened on the journal as she walked forward, stopping just short of the desk. The air between them felt thick with unspoken words, with the weight of everything that had gone unsaid for so long. She could feel her pulse in her throat, could hear the pounding of her heart in her ears. This was it, the moment when everything would change. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything?" Izzy said, her voice low but steady. "My father, this house, everything we had before you came along. But you're not fooling me anymore. I know who you are. I know what you've done." For a brief moment, Elena's expression faltered, just a flash of something flickering behind her eyes, before the mask slid back into place. But it was enough. Izzy saw it. She saw the crack, the weakness. Elena leaned back in her chair, her fingers delicately brushing against the edge of the desk. "What exactly do you think you know, Izzy? You're just a child who doesn't understand how the world works, how things have to be done. Your father is too busy. I'm the one who takes care of everything around here. You should be thanking me." Izzy took a deep breath, feeling the sting of her mother's words in the back of her mind. "She'll take everything from us. Don't let her in." The words were a warning, and now they rang loud in her ears. She wasn't a child anymore. She had seen enough to know what was really going on. "You think you're the one who's holding everything together?" Izzy said, her voice rising now. "You're just manipulating him. You've been doing it ever since you came here. You've lied to him, lied to me, and now you're just trying to take what doesn't belong to you." For the first time, Elena's composure slipped. Her eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line. She stood up from her chair slowly, her gaze never leaving Izzy's face. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice sharp. "You think you've figured it all out, but you have no idea. Your father doesn't need you. You're just a burden to him. He's been trying to move on. And you—" Elena's voice dropped to a low, menacing tone. "You just keep holding him back." Izzy didn't flinch. She stood her ground, holding the journal up between them. "This was my mother's. She knew what you were doing. She knew who you were. And now I know too." Izzy tossed the journal onto the desk, the pages splaying out like a secret finally exposed. "You're not fooling anyone anymore." Elena froze her eyes, darting to the journal, her breath catching in her throat. The room seemed to go still, the tension hanging like smoke in the air. Elena reached for the journal, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked it up, her eyes scanning the pages, her expression tightening with every word she read. The color drained from her face as she saw the letter to Elliot, the words her mother had written, the warning she had left behind. "You've been lying to me, lying to him." Izzy continued, her voice shaking with the weight of the truth. "I won't let you do this anymore." Elena stood completely still, her hand gripping the journal tightly. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other, the silence between them charged with 1,000 unspoken words. Elena's mask had shattered, but there was still something cold and dangerous beneath the surface. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes flicked to the door behind Izzy, and for just a split second, Izzy could see the plan forming in Elena's mind. Before Izzy could react, Elena's hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the desk. "You think you've won. You're nothing, Izzy. You're just a little girl who doesn't know how things work." Elena's voice was low, a dangerous, venomous whisper. "I've done everything for this family, everything, and you're going to regret this." Izzy didn't move. She wasn't afraid anymore. "The only thing I regret," she said, her voice steady and strong, "is ever letting you in." There was a long pause, the weight of those words hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Then Elena dropped the journal onto the desk, her expression unreadable. Slowly she backed away, her eyes never leaving Izzy. "I'll make sure your father hears about this," Elena muttered, her voice tight. "I'll make sure he knows what you've done." Izzy didn't respond. She just stood there watching as Elena turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. The door slammed shut behind her, but Izzy didn't flinch. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had done it. She had confronted the monster in her house, the woman who had tried to tear her family apart. For the first time in a long while, Izzy felt like she could breathe again. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her life, and no matter what happened next, she knew she would never back down. The door to the study slammed shut with a finality that rattled the quiet of the mansion, but it didn't scare Izzy. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a surge of power flow through her. The confrontation with Elena had been intense, but it was also a turning point, a shift in the dynamics of the household that could no longer be undone. Izzy had stood her ground, faced down the woman who had threatened to tear her family apart, and in doing so she had found a piece of herself that she had thought was lost. She wasn't the frightened, quiet girl she had been. She had become something else, something stronger, and she knew that everything was about to change. As the echoes of Elena's retreating footsteps faded into the distance, Izzy stood still, taking a deep breath. She could hear the distant hum of the vineyard's wind turbines in the background, the gentle rustling of the leaves outside in the evening air. It was as though the entire world outside the mansion had stayed the same, while everything within it was on the verge of breaking apart. But Izzy was no longer afraid of that. She had already crossed the line, and now there was no going back. The next morning, as the first rays of light broke through the tall windows of her room, Izzy felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. She had made her move, but the battle wasn't over. She needed her father to see Elena for what she really was. He had to understand the gravity of the situation, the dangerous game Elena had been playing all along. Without that understanding, nothing would change. And no matter how hard it was, Izzy knew that it was up to her to make him see the truth. Elliot returned from his business trip later that day. His face was tired, his eyes weary from too many hours of work and too little sleep. When he entered the mansion, his mind was occupied with numbers, contracts, and the next vineyard expansion. He didn't notice the subtle change in the air, the tension that had replaced the usual stale quiet in the house. But Izzy did. She had been waiting for this moment. She had rehearsed what she would say, the words she would use to expose the truth, to make him understand that Elena wasn't the woman he thought she was. He was going to be hurt. There was no way around that. But if she didn't do this, then everything her mother had warned about the manipulation, the deceit, the control would continue, and she couldn't let that happen. Dad Izzy's voice trembled, though she fought to keep it steady. She stood in the living room, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She had to do this. There was no turning back now. Elliot paused, his hand still on the doorframe of the study, as he turned to face her. "Izzy, what is it? I just got in." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm now. "You're going to listen. You have to." There was a long silence. Elliot frowned, but he could see the fire in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in her for a long time. Maybe it was the fear, the intensity, or maybe it was something else entirely. But he could see it now. "What's going on?" he asked softly. His voice edged with concern. "I know everything Izzy said." The words felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders, but they didn't come easily. "I know about Elena, about what she's been doing, what she's been hiding from you." Elliot's expression shifted, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Izzy shook her head, her breath catching in her throat. "You don't see it, Dad. You don't see how she's been manipulating you, how she's been playing you, playing both of us. You have to listen to me because I can't watch you destroy everything we have for her." He took a step forward, his brow furrowed. "Izzy, what's this about Elena is?" No, Izzy cut him off again, her voice shaking now with the weight of everything she had kept inside. "I know about her past, about what she's done. She's been lying to you this whole time, Dad. You don't know her. She's dangerous. She's not who you think she is." Elliot blinked, the confusion deepening. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Izzy took a deep breath and handed him the journal. His eyes moved from the journal to her face, his confusion giving way to something else. Doubt. Hesitation. He flipped open the journal, his eyes scanning the pages. As he read the letter from Laura, the weight of it seemed to settle onto his shoulders. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the pages, his face paling with each passing word. Laura's words echoed in his mind as he read them again. "I'm scared. I've been trying to ignore it, to pretend that everything is fine, but there are things about her I can't ignore anymore." His pulse quickened. He had never imagined that Laura had seen the same things Izzy was seeing now. He had been too blinded by his grief, too absorbed in the vineyard to notice the subtle signs. But now, as he read the letter, everything began to fall into place. Dad Izzy's voice cracked with emotion, pulling him out of the haze of the letter. "You have to believe me. I've seen it. I've seen how she treats you, how she treats me. You think she's trying to help us, but she's just using you. She's using both of us." Elliot's eyes were wide now, his mind racing as the truth settled in. Elena had been controlling him in ways he hadn't even realized. Her charm, her beauty, her manipulative sweetness, it had all been a front. a mask to hide her true intentions. How had he not seen it? How had he been so blind to the fact that she had been poisoning their family from the inside out? But even as the realization washed over him, even as the hurt and betrayal began to settle in his chest, there was something else, something he had been avoiding for years. Guilt. He had been absent for so long, had been so consumed by work and grief, that he had failed to protect his daughter, to protect the one thing that really mattered. Now, in this moment, standing face to face with the daughter he had neglected, he couldn't deny the truth anymore. He had failed her. "Izzy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have." But Izzy shook her head, cutting him off again. "It's not too late, Dad. We can fix this. But you need to see her for who she really is. And you need to do it now." Elliot stood there holding the journal in his hands, his mind spinning. The truth had been right in front of him, hidden behind the veil of his own sorrow and distraction. But now that he had seen it, there was no denying it. Elena had been manipulating him, controlling him in ways he hadn't even realized. And the worst part was, he had been too absorbed in his own world to see how much it was affecting his daughter. "I'll fix this," he said finally, his voice steady now. "I'll make things right, I promise." It wasn't an easy promise to make, and it wasn't a promise he could keep without consequences. But for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt something other than guilt. He felt resolve. He was going to fix this. He was going to protect his daughter, protect their family, and take back what had been lost. Over the next few days, Elliot began to take action. He confronted Elena, and though she tried to manipulate the situation with her usual charm, he saw through it now. He saw her for who she really was, and he knew what needed to be done. The confrontation was tense, filled with words that were as sharp as knives. But in the end, Elena's mask fell. She tried to play the victim, tried to twist the narrative, but the evidence had already been laid bare. It was too late for her. As she left the mansion, her face cold and bitter, Izzy watched from the window. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from it. It wasn't fixed, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, father and daughter sat down together, no longer strangers in the same house, no longer held captive by secrets and lies. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with difficult conversations and painful truths. But as the last of the sunlight faded from the vineyard, there was a flicker of hope in their hearts, a belief that maybe they could rebuild what had been broken. The days following Elena's departure felt both unnervingly still and surprisingly calm, like the moments after a storm has passed, leaving the air fresh, the ground wet, and the sky clear. The mansion, which had once felt like a prison of silence and tension, now stood quiet, an empty vessel awaiting its purpose. Izzy could still hear the echoes of the house, the sound of her father's footsteps down the long corridors, the creaking of the old floorboards. But now there was something different in the rhythm. The house had transformed. It was no longer a place built on fear and pretense, but on the possibility of something better, something real. It was late in the evening when Izzy, who had spent most of the afternoon wandering the vineyard, returned to the house. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of deep orange and purple. There was a strange sense of stillness in the air as she walked through the front door, almost as if the house itself were waiting for her. She had grown used to the sound of her footsteps in the empty halls, but today there was something different, an undercurrent of anticipation that hummed beneath the quiet. As she passed through the main hall, she caught sight of her father sitting in the living room, his posture stiff, his hands folded in his lap. For the first time in a long time, he was sitting still, not lost in the business of the vineyard, not consumed by the world outside, but present. She paused in the doorway, watching him for a moment. His face was tired, but there was something else in his eyes. Something that had been missing for years. Hope. He wasn't just looking at the world through the lens of his grief anymore. He had begun to see her again. See them. "Dad?" Izzy's voice was tentative, breaking the silence that had settled around them. Elliot looked up, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He had been waiting for her, but he hadn't known how to begin. The weight of everything that had happened hung between them, unspoken, but palpable. But this moment, this first real moment between them in years, was different. "Izzy," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet tenderness she hadn't heard in ages. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. About you. About us." She walked into the room, slowly taking a seat across from him. The space between them was still there, but it felt more like the space between two people trying to find each other again, rather than the distance that had once kept them apart. "Dad, She faltered for a moment, unsure of how to put everything into words. The rawness of the past weeks, the revelations, the confrontation, it was all still fresh in her mind. But now that the dust had settled, she felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. "I'm glad you saw it. I'm glad you saw her for who she really is." Elliot nodded, his gaze steady. "I should have seen it long before now. I was blind, Izzy. I was so caught up in trying to fix things on my own, I didn't see how much I was failing you. Failing both of us." His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat, his eyes not leaving hers. "But I promise you this, I won't make that mistake again." Izzy met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a child waiting for her father's attention. She felt like someone whose voice had been heard, whose pain had been acknowledged. The weight she had carried for so long, the loneliness, the fear, the uncertainty began to lift piece by piece. "You don't have to make it up to me, Dad," Izzy said quietly, her voice steady. "But we need to rebuild. Together. I know it's not going to be easy, and I know it's going to take time. But we've got to start somewhere." Elliot reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly as it rested on the arm of the chair. It was an unfamiliar gesture, one that felt strange in its rawness, but it was the first step. The first genuine connection between them in years. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll rebuild. Together." The next few weeks were filled with small, deliberate steps toward healing. The vineyard, once a symbol of Elliot's obsession with success and a life that had spiraled out of control, began to shift in its meaning. Elliot took a more active role in the daily operations, but this time his focus was different. It wasn't just about profit or expansion anymore. He found himself taking pleasure in the simple act of caring for the land, spending hours walking through the vines with Izzy by his side, teaching her about the cycles of the harvest, sharing with her the beauty of the world he had once neglected. They spent evenings together sitting on the porch as the sun set over the vineyard, talking about everything and nothing. Izzy, who had once felt so disconnected from him, began to rediscover the father she had lost. There were no grand gestures, no over-the-top declarations, but the quiet moments they shared were enough. They were building something new, a foundation of trust, of patience, and of love that had been missing for far too long. Izzy's artwork also began to flourish again. The heavy weight of worry and uncertainty that had weighed on her creativity began to lift as she rediscovered the freedom she had once felt when she picked up a paintbrush. Her sketches, once filled with dark and stormy images, began to reflect the peace that was slowly settling over the house. She painted the vineyard, the land that had once felt like a prison, now transformed into a place of refuge and renewal. Her paintings captured the change, the rebirth of her father, the rebirth of their family, and the rebirth of herself. And though the process of healing was far from over, there was an undeniable shift in the house. The air was different now, lighter, filled with the hope that had been buried under years of grief and fear. The mansion that had once felt so cold and empty now felt like a home again, a place where laughter could return, where conversation could flow freely without the weight of secrets and lies hanging over it. But even as the family began to rebuild, they knew that the shadow of the past still lingered. Elena's departure had been a relief, but it had also left a wound that would take time to heal. Izzy knew that the scars of what had happened would always be with them, that they would never be fully erased. But she also knew that the future was something they could shape together as long as they remained committed to each other, as long as they continued to communicate and to love. It was late one afternoon, as they walked through the vineyard together, that Izzy realized just how much had changed. The vines stretched out before them, the earth beneath their feet rich and warm, with the promise of a new season. Izzy looked up at her father, who was smiling down at her, a look of contentment on his face that she hadn't seen in years. She could feel the weight of the past, of everything they had been through, fading away, leaving only the present. "Do you think it's really possible to start over?" Izzy asked, her voice soft, uncertain. Elliot looked down at her, his eyes thoughtful. "I think we already have." Izzy smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she believed him. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table, the conversation flowed easily, the laughter light and full of promise. There were no more long silences, no more tension hanging in the air. The healing process wasn't complete, but the path ahead was clear. And for the first time, Izzy didn't feel like she was walking it alone. She had her father by her side, and together they would face whatever came next. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the Sutherland estate transformed not just in the land, but in the hearts of those who lived there. The vineyard, once a symbol of isolation and neglect, had become a symbol of renewal, of second chances. And though there were still challenges to face, they knew they could face them together. The road to healing was long, but it was a road they were no longer walking alone. And in that truth, Izzy found a sense of peace she had never thought possible. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. The weight of the past had not been forgotten, but it had been acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, there was freedom. They had found a way forward together. And as the sun set once again over the vineyard, casting a warm glow over the land, Izzy knew that this was just the beginning. The future was theirs to shape, and with love and determination, they would build it. Together. The journey of Izzy and her father Elliot in Shadows of the Vineyard is not just a story of a fractured family finding its way back together. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of facing truth, confronting uncomfortable realities, and embracing the courage to heal. So often in life, we bury our pain, our doubts, and our struggles, hoping that time will erase them. But time alone doesn't heal wounds. It merely lets them fester in the silence. This story teaches us that the key to growth and healing is not avoidance, but confrontation. We have to face the things that frighten us, the things we'd rather not see. Whether it's the manipulations of someone close to us, or the painful truths we don't want to acknowledge, the only way forward is to bring them into the light. Izzy's decision to speak up to confront her father and Elena was a courageous act. In doing so, she refused to remain silent, ignored, or afraid. It's easy to remain passive, to let things slide, especially when it feels like too much effort to confront the messiness of life. But when you confront the things that are wrong, you can begin to rebuild. Just like the vineyard was cultivated with care and patience, so too are relationships. They require tending honest conversations and a willingness to face the thorns as much as the blooms. Izzy's transformation from a quiet, withdrawn girl into someone who understood the power of her own voice is a lesson for us all. It teaches us that we are not helpless in our struggles, that we have agency in our healing. You may not always have control over what happens to you, but you do have control over how you respond. The story also highlights the importance of acknowledging the past, not burying it under layers of distraction work or even denial. Elliot, too, learned this lesson the hard way. His avoidance of the truth led to his emotional distance from his daughter and the gradual erosion of his family. It wasn't until he faced the reality of Elena's manipulations that he could begin to heal, both personally and with Izzy. It's easy to want to forget the things that hurt, but the only way to truly move forward is to confront them, acknowledge them, and allow them to shape us into better, more self-aware individuals. We all carry baggage from the past, but it's not about how heavy the load is. It's about how you carry it, whether you let it weigh you down or learn from it to grow stronger. So what can we take from Izzy and Elliot's journey? The lesson here is simple yet profound. Don't wait for someone else to fix things, and don't let fear or shame keep you from speaking up. Sometimes the first step toward healing is just saying the truth aloud, even if it feels uncomfortable, whether it's in your family, friendships, or work. Don't let the silence or lies fester. Speak your truth, stand your ground, and give yourself the permission to move forward with your life. It's never easy, but nothing worth having ever is. As you reflect on the story, I encourage you to think about the areas in your own life where you might need to have those difficult conversations. Are there relationships that need mending? Is there something you've been avoiding, hoping it will get better on its own? Now is the time to address it before it grows into something larger than it needs to be. Don't wait for tomorrow when you can make a change today. And before I end, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this journey with Izzy and her father. Your time and engagement mean the world, and I hope this story has resonated with you, perhaps in ways you didn't expect. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What parts of the story spoke to you? How do you plan to apply the lessons learned here in your own life? Please feel free to share your reflections, comments, or questions. Let's continue this conversation and keep learning together. Thank you once again, and remember, healing starts with truth, and courage starts with one small step